Life is tough, man, but hey, good news. Good news. Whatever this looks like to you, a successful life seems to follow certain patterns. And patterns can be replicated and turned into habits. If you take anything away from this video, take this. We become what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. So I've been noticing a couple of reoccurring patterns in the most successful people that I know, and it all starts by acting with intention. The reason why Gen Zers are the unhappiest generation and feel so disconnected and lost is because we're all being trained to adopt this mindless behavior. There's this famous experiment where a scientist places a number of fleas into a small glass jar, and naturally a flea has the ability to jump 36 inches in the air, and they're easily capable of escaping and jumping out of a small glass jar, but that's no surprise. The experiment wasn't about seeing if they could escape, it was seeing if they could be trained. So the scientist adds a lid to the jar and leaves them alone for 3 days. Now, even trapped inside the jar, a flea can jump with enough force to get 36 inches in the air. But what happens in those 3 days is the fleas jump and hit their heads on the lid again and again until eventually they begin to adjust their own behavior. And when the scientist comes back and removes the lid, the fleas are still capable of a 36-inch vertical, but instead of jumping at 36 inches, they now jump only as high as they could without hitting their heads on the lid that is no longer there. They still jump, but never beyond the now imaginary boundary, and their babies will learn to do the same. And now, we can go down the conspiracy route that I may or may not believe in and compare the glass jar to school or to the 9 to 5 rat race, or we can just put that aside, and if we're just asking the right questions, two come to mind. First, if a single flea did break the pattern and jumped out of the jar, would others follow? Or would they just look and point and say, hey man, that dude is nuts? Second, if the fleas are being promised security, they're being fed and protected within the jar, do they really have any reason to leave? The truest thing I've ever heard is if you are not growing, you are dying. There is no plateau. Think about it. When you're born, your brain is continually developing until you're about 25 years old, and you continue to develop physically and mentally until one day you're just not. One day your memory starts getting shorter and shorter. You're no longer able to perform a certain task like you used to, and your skin starts getting all wrinkly. Or maybe you're a gym rat and you're there every single day and you can press 225 pounds until you take a break for a little while and try to come back. You're probably only able to press 185 pounds. It's still a lot, but your potential was no longer growing. And if you're going through life mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours a day or sitting in a cubicle from 9 to 5 just because your success, your potential for success is no longer growing. So doing things with intention is where it all starts, but the moment everything begins to come together, is glued together, is when you begin living beyond yourself. Now, I'm a man of faith, and whether or not you share that faith with me, I think we can all agree on one thing. Life is meaningless if there is no purpose. I mean, that's just basic logic. If there is no purpose, there is no meaning. And this goes along with moving with intention, but understanding why you do things will give your life clarity and direction. That job you go to is not just to collect a paycheck, it's to take care of your family. That time you spend perfecting your craft is not done in vain, it's done to be able to serve better. Look, everyone talks about the unknown like it's some big scary thing, but it's the familiar that has always bothered me. So Greek mythology as a practice religion has pretty much died off, but these stories still influence us today. They help to shape many cultures, political systems, ways of thinking, and they were pretty much the only books I would read in 5th grade, and I still freaking love them. Anyways, these stories are so influential because they put the extremes of human behavior on display for everybody to see, and it's disturbing. It's like watching a scary movie. You want to look away, but your eyes are just glued to the screen and you just can't. And for whatever reason, these stories, these tales, contain all these cruel and unusual punishments, ranging from being chained to a rock for an eagle to eat out your liver, to being cursed with an eternal hunger. And honestly, I'm not sure which is worse, but the most disturbing stories are not the cruel and unusual ones, it's the most relatable and familiar ones. In a land far, far away, there was an ancient king who came to power through his trickery. It allowed him to build a prosperous kingdom, but he was also cruel and unusual. He would do random weird things like seducing his niece, like who does that, and taking random visitors and killing them just to show his power. And even though the gods themselves were cruel and unusual, The king's behavior angered them, mostly because of his arrogance, so they tried to punish him twice. But, he was a clever man, so he escaped death twice. Eventually, Zeus and all the other gods were fed up with King Sisyphus, so instead of trying to punish him because he kept escaping, they came up with something that would allow him to think he was still getting the last laugh. They gave him the simple task of pushing a gigantic boulder up a hill, which he accepted because even he thought he was getting off easy. But what he did not know was that every time he would get near the top, the boulder would begin pushing back and eventually roll back down to the bottom of the hill. For the rest of eternity, the clever King Sisyphus has been trapped in a never-ending cycle of meaningless work, and just like the fleas, we can look at this several different ways. Ultimately, though, King Sisyphus was trapped by the gods using his own lack of direction against him. He didn't care about getting back to his family. He didn't care about getting back to his kingdom. What he did care about was preserving his own vanity and showing the gods that he could do what they said he couldn't. You can work day and night to become a billionaire, but if that wealth dies with you, what was the point? You can swim halfway across the lake, but instead of just finishing the job, you can turn back. But what was the point? No school will ever teach you this, but work only takes you so far. Eventually, you will reach burnout, and it's the successful people that are able to move beyond that burnout because they have a purpose beyond themselves. Whether it's family, faith, friends, or some sort of philanthropy project, it could be anything, but the point is, there is something. First, you get rid of the mindless behavior and replace it with intentional acts. Second, you fuel those acts by understanding your why, and if you build a habit of this kind of behavior, you will be successful. This may be the last time we see each other, so if you want this relationship to continue, I'd love to see your face again, so please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.